All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've all successfully used your 5 minutes wisely and washed your hands, of course. Food safety and health is very important to us all here. So next up, as you know, is Dan
Dan
Mays.
So give a brief introduction here. Dan Mays grew up outside of Philadelphia, and while in graduate school for environmental engineering, realized that he wanted to be a farmer. He began his search for land on Maine Farm Link, very similar to New Jersey Farm Link, great resource, and was able to buy the farm that he has thanks to a purchase easement negotiated with the Maine Farmland Trust, the town of Scarborough, and the Scarborough Land Trust. Now, 6 years later, Dan has transformed the acreage into a rich and biodiverse farm where he raises organic vegetables and herbs, as well as pasture-raised eggs, chicken, pork, and turkeys. And as I mentioned earlier, he also sleeps from time to time.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here with everybody virtually. Yeah, I'm zooming from southern Maine, like they said, Scarborough, just south of Portland. And I'm going to talk about no-till organic vegetable farming. So yeah, I have a little presentation. I guess I'll jump right in unless anyone else needs to say anything.
We'll send it on over to you.
All right, thanks. So yeah, no-till vegetable farming. I'm Daniel Mays of Frith Farm here in Scarborough, Maine. I'm going to talk about some of the principles and practices that guide how we grow. And you know, the climate's a little different down in New Jersey, but not much. So hopefully you can, you know, take what fits, leave what doesn't. And I'll try to leave a little bit of time for some questions at the end. We'll see how it goes. So first, before I jump in, I just wanted to acknowledge that, you know, we use the term regenerative a lot to talk about ecological phenomena, but I think it really needs to also encompass human history. So we need to regenerate the relationships we have with each other and with the land, because there's a long history of agriculture in this country that's based on, you know, stolen land and exploited labor. So as farmers, I feel like we have the responsibility to face that history and try to heal it. So, you know, here's some first steps you can take and find out whose land you're on, what, you know, the often unceded territories, and we can learn our history. The Howard Zinn project is a great way to do that. And then there's a map of potential reparations and rematriation that we can, you know, actually take some action steps toward healing. So yeah, with that, I'll jump in. I'm going to talk a bit about the farm, sort of an overview of the farm, just so you have a sense of my context. Then I'll jump into the principles that guide our practices here in terms of soil care. And then jump right into our practices with lots of pictures and hopefully, you know, simulate a little tour of the farm. And some of those practices are, we use a system of permanent raised beds, no-till, of course, and then integrating into that, we use cover crops, interplanting, and perennial plantings. So these are just a few sort of hand-picked practices that can really help build soil health and help sequester carbon in the soil, tying in with the previous presentation. So yeah, a bit about the farm. 10 years ago, I think that bio was a few years old, they said. So it's 10 years ago that I bought the farm. And it was, as you see here, is an open hayfield and a pretty much condemnable house. I think the house brought the value of the land down a little bit, so that was nice. And yeah, I was just I'm pretty much fresh out of graduate school. I studied environmental engineering, was headed toward a, you know, sort of computer-based career in energy modeling for buildings, and sort of had my early life crisis and figured I wanted to do something a little more balanced with body, mind, and soul. So farming is what I settled on, and here's where I ended up. Now 10 years later, this is a nice little drone image from one of our customers. This is the same farm. We've built a lot of infrastructure and also just built a lot of permanent raised beds. And so we're up to 3 acres of no-till vegetables, herbs, and flowers. And on those 3 acres, we employ 9 full-time seasonal folks from April through November. And we sell through all local venues, natural food stores. We have a 200-member CSA. We attend our local farmers markets, and we have a small on-farm store. So yeah, we grow very intensively. 3 people per acre is a pretty intensive labor structure, and I really believe in that. Reintegrating humans with the land, I think, is a path toward sustainability. So yeah, let's jump in and talk about how we care for the soil. So I look at nature as sort of the model for the bar that we can try to reach in our farming practices. I think we're never we don't often reach it, but it's something to shoot for. And by nature, I mean any piece of land where concrete and industry is not influencing things. So nature can include humans too, if humans are working with nature. So, but in this case, this is an unmowed field. Just might look kind of weedy and unkempt, but in fact, it is the principles we see here are just a huge amount of photosynthesis happening. There's multiple layers of growth, and yeah, lots of, so yeah, getting into the principles. So yeah, the photosynthesize is maximized. There's just layers and layers of green plants. There's a diversity of different plants. Most of them are perennials, so they're living throughout the year, living roots in the ground at all times. And there's just a huge amount of biodiversity. There's you rarely see just a couple species in a natural setting. There's just dozens and dozens, hundreds of species of plants and animals all proliferating. The soil is pretty much always covered unless there's been a natural disaster. Nature keeps the soil pretty well covered. You don't see it. And yeah, so natural disaster isn't really something we want to emulate, over and over on our farms with tillage. Tillage is essentially like in a tornado, landslide, earthquake, all in one, just really churning up that soil ecosystem. And then lastly, the last principle is, just avoiding disturbance of the soil as much as possible. To grow food, we have to, strategically disturb at times, but we can really minimize that. So yeah, the term no-till is, sounds like a purist term, but really it's avoiding as much tillage as possible. But as you'll see, we do till once initially to form the beds, and then after that, we're pretty much no soil disturbance other than poking in a transplant here and there. So yeah, these are the primary goals of soil management for us on the farm. And you could even say these are the primary goals of our farming endeavor, and vegetables are a byproduct. And I think that attitude toward the soil enables us to get more and more productive each year, rather than kind of cashing in the future of the soil health for a short-term gain. So yeah, why care about these principles? Photosynthesis, diversity, soil coverage, undisturbed soils. These principles allow the soil food web to flourish. This is a little image from Fedco, as a local seed company up here in Maine. And there's no way we can even envision the soil food web. It's so vast and interwoven and largely mysterious to us. But it provides, we know that it provides, we've shown this in science, provides our fertility to our plants. It provides disease resistance, pest control, gives nutrients to our crops. It makes them actually healthy for us. It It also cleans the air and our water. In short, it lets us exist on this planet, because we, as much as we try to pretend otherwise, we are terrestrial organisms. Therefore, we are part of this soil food web. So yeah, often we see it as sort of this other thing that we need to, help nurture so that then we can extract from it. But when we really, think more holistically, we realize that we are a part of it. So by nurturing it, we are actually just, taking care of ourselves. So yeah, getting into what this looks like in a practical way. We are a commercial farm. We need to make a living. So these are our permanent no-till beds. We keep the soil completely covered at all times. So what you see here is actually some compost on top of the bed, wood chip mulch in the paths, and then we will either transplant or direct seed right into that. So this is sort of the building blocks, if you will. The level one no-till is just cover the soil, keep it covered all the time. And a wonderful, there are all sorts of side benefits of this besides healthier soil, but this pretty much keeps the weeds down too. So we spend very little time weeding relative to other organic farms, because the soil is completely covered. The weed seed bank is pretty much rendered irrelevant. So yeah, that's sort of the mantra on the farm, is never see the soil. I think of the soil as sort of the internal organs of the earth. So if we're, churning those up and exposing them to the elements, that's really just unhealthy for that ecosystem. So if we never see the soil, we can kind of count on it to be establishing its own ecosystem in an undisturbed way. And ideally, we would keep it covered with living plants. That, compost and mulch is great, but that's not maximizing photosynthesis, which is the number one, goal of soil health. So yeah, ideally we can grow living plants. Ideally, those living plants can also give us some income. So here's basil between tomatoes and the high tunnel. I promise there's a path in the middle there that's kind of closed over, but we kind of harvest our way down the middle first. But you can see there's just, there's a huge amount of photosynthesis. That photosynthesis is getting, pumped down into the soil via the plant roots. That's the only way to create soil, is through photosynthesis. Compost is great, but that's just bringing in material that photosynthesized somewhere else. Growing plants on our soil is a great way to build soil right here on our land. It's the only way. And it's the way that's, over millions of years has generated all the soils on the planet. So let's keep that act of creation underway. That's really the only way to keep soils alive. So here's a cover crop of sorghum Sudan grass next to one of our, I call them beneficial beds of perennial pollinator plants. So this is, it doesn't really look like a vegetable farm, but this is a vegetable farm. This is where we grow crops after these. The sorghum Sudan will die back in the cold of winter, and we'll plant right through that stubble with our next crop. So this is a way to generate soil fertility and replace the need for pretty much, most inputs. We do add a little bit of fertilizer depending on the crop we're planting. So yeah, let's talk about what that's like to form these beds from scratch, starting with sod, a hayfield or grass, whatever you have. These are the steps. So I've tried this various different ways, but this is sort of my preferred steps for getting beds established. So like I said, we're not purists. We do till one time, that initial forming of the beds. It's pretty hard to go from grass to vegetables without some kind of significant disturbance. I've experimented with smothering and sheet mulching and all that, and that works fine, but I found this is actually a more efficient way to get started, and you can actually get a crop out of here faster, and it gives us the opportunity to mix in soil amendments and compost for establishing that initial fertility that's needed to help grow good crops. So what isn't shown here is that there was a layer of compost on top and soil amendments, according to a soil test. We look at what the deficiencies are and add the minerals that are needed. And this is sort of, since this is the last time we're tilling, the first and last time, it's the only chance we have to mechanically mix in those soil amendments. So I think it's really worth doing that the first time here. Then we tarp those beds once they're formed, and that is to smother all those perennial grasses and weeds. If we just tilled it once and then left it, all the grass would resprout, reroot itself, and we'd either have to keep tilling it 3-4 times to kill it all, which would just destroy a lot of soil life. But with the tarps here, we can kind of smother them for about a month in the summer is usually enough if the weather is warm, up to a couple months, and then we can pull those tarps off and we have nice sort of stale beds. Stale in the sense that there are no, there's no perennial weeds, there's no weeds growing. A lot of the weed seed in the top ½ inch or so has been kind of cooked off because of the tarps. Tarps get pretty hot. So then to ensure that the soil is covered and the weeds, whatever weeds didn't get killed or whatever weed seed didn't get killed won't resprout, we cover in a layer of compost. So that's what you see here. We put wood chips in the paths as a more enduring mulch, and then we seed that. This is raked out and seeded to a cover crop mix. We choose the species carefully so that they will die back in the cold of winter. That way we don't have to worry about terminating them with equipment or machinery. We let the cold do that work for us. So here you can see the beds. There's, you can't see any soil. That's all compost on top and wood chips in the paths. And you can see the cover crop mix coming up. And here the cover crop is establishing pretty well. It's completely weed free with no work because we smothered all the weeds and then put a layer of compost and planted into that. So there's, that compost acts as a weed barrier, plus all the weeds were already smothered fully with the tarp. So yeah, there's really no weeds. We might walk through there once just to pick a couple weeds that might have, poked up through all that. We do treat cover crops just like cash crops in terms of, irrigation, weeding, intensive management that way. And then this is that same plot in the fall. This is, it's a diverse mix. I think it's 5 or 6 species in there of cover crop. And then we can rotate animals over it too, and graze it down, add their fertility, activate those biological symbioses that come with grazing. And since this is in the fall, that gets around all the waiting period, 120-day waiting period for organic production can happen over the winter when the soil is dormant anyway. So then in the spring, all this will have died back and it'll be kind of like a straw mulch on the surface. And we can either plant right through it with transplants or rake it into the path and direct seed the beds from there. So yeah, once those beds are established, like I showed there, how do we maintain them? Here are a couple beds on the right here that were lettuce heads. We harvested all the lettuce heads and just gave a light rake and then direct seeded carrots. Nothing more than that. So, flipping beds can be as easy as doing almost nothing, just pushing the seeder through the bed again once the previous crop is out. Some crops leave more residues than that, if we're not harvesting the whole crop out of there. So for those like, kale or cabbage or something, we flail mow. So we have a little walk behind BCS walking tractor with a flail mower on it. So you can see that farthest right bed, those couple beds there have been flail mowed. It's basically a chipper shredder on wheels that leaves all the residues right on top of the soil. Cuts right down to the soil surface without actually disturbing the soil. Brassicas will often regrow from the roots even after being flail mowed, so we will tarp it if needed for maybe just a day or two if it's really hot, or over a week if it's in the shoulder seasons. And then we pull off that tarp, and whatever residues are there, we just work around. So we, if we're seeding salad greens like here, this is spinach, we'll just offset the seeder a little bit and go right through the stubble. So all that residue is just right there in place. We're not disturbing the root systems. If you were to pull up any of those dead stocky plants, like worms are just feasting on their roots. So if you run a rototiller through that, you chop all that up, killing, a lot of those worms and, pulverizing the soil structure that's been built by those plant roots. So this is just a really great way to leave that soil intact but still get a plant in there, the next crop in there. And when the soil starts to show through, through that layer of compost, the soil starts to digest the compost eventually. So, it'll break down and you'll start to get more weeds, or you'll start to just see more soil showing. So then we just add some more compost on top as needed to make sure we never see the soil. And a little side note, this is how we spread compost efficiently. The tractor never drives in the fields because we avoid compaction from that. And I just believe there's a level of care that comes with keeping our feet on the ground and our hands in the soil. So, but loading compost, that's heavy stuff. That would be a lot of work for our scale. So we do use a little tractor to fill the wheelbarrows at the head of the bed. And then the humans push the wheelbarrows down the bed and apply it right where needed. My philosophy is not trying to eliminate labor. I think labor is a wonderful part of the farm. It's a wonderful way to integrate, diversity into the farm. Humans being part of the soil food web, we are part of that diversity. So getting us out onto the land, I think, has all sorts of benefits. So then we fill the path, mulch the paths with wood chips or leaves, a little bit more enduring mulch than the compost on the beds. And so we have to mulch the paths less frequently. And this just creates this wonderful, rich, like brownie batter to push transplants into. We don't need tools. You can just poke them in with your hand. And it creates this weed-free weed barrier as well. So it's just a pleasure to work in these conditions. It's not drudgery. We have 100-foot beds, so it's there's never that like 1,000-foot bed where you're like, oh, when am I ever going to reach the end of it? But yeah, just all sorts of side benefits of caring for the soil in this way. And then, so when it comes around for winter time, here in Maine, we have pretty long winters. We really want to protect the soil through the winter. All the snow and rain that can come through winter can really, take a toll on the soil structure. So we add extra mulch. We use leaves or sometimes straw for beds that were harvested too late to plant a cover crop. Ideally all the beds would have a cover crop, but in our climate, we kind of have to seed cover crop by the end of September for something like winter rye. Otherwise, it really doesn't have time to establish. So for beds where we're harvesting carrots in October and November, those beds, there's no time for cover crop to establish on that. So we just mulch those for the winter. And then the next spring, we literally just rake off that mulch into the path and expose the bed again for planting. And we're exposing the composted bed. So we're leaving the compost on the bed. There's still soil coverage, but we can plant right into that compost. And because that compost is nice and rich and dark, it actually helps heat up the soil faster than a lighter, if the bed were covered in a lighter material. So then, how do we integrate cover crops into this? Because remember, the photosynthesis is really the key to soil health in the long run. Keeping the soil covered protects it from degradation, but it doesn't build it. So photosynthesis is really what we want to focus on for that. And cover crops are a great way to do that. More than most vegetable crops, cover crops really add biomass to the soil and can grow, through the winter potentially. So that's a real reason to cover crop, not just continually cash crop in rotation. So to keep it simple, I'm just going to look at two scenarios. One is peas and oats. That's kind of like a gateway to cover cropping. They're very easy to manage, easy to terminate. And yeah, they don't typically become weeds or compete with the next crop. So we'll look at those. You can either seed them in the fall and for us, I think in New Jersey too, those would winter kill reliably. Winter kill means to die in the cold of winter. Naturally, they just can't survive those temperatures. Or you could seed them in the spring, early spring, before summer crops that you're going to plant like in June. And then the second example is rye and clover. We use crimson clover. And these are great. Rye is especially great for overwintering. It's super cold hardy. I think it can go down to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. And we can plant that pretty late in the fall too. It establishes well and even when the soil is cold. So we can seed that up to October 1st and still get a good stand. And that will keep photosynthesizing all through the winter. You know, right now outside our rye cover crop is still lush green and feeding the soil right through the winter. It regrows well in the spring, and then we terminate it usually around the end of May. And I'll show all these, you know, photos of all these steps, and then we'll plant right into those residues. So first we got the peas and oats here going through the picture tour. These are spring planted. Again, you could plant them in the fall and let winter do the work of terminating them. But in this case, we planted them in the spring. Here they are in full flower. This is a great stage, you know, they're waist high. This is a great time to terminate them. So knock them down or flail mow them. We used to flail mow. That's, you know, really easy to run the flail mower over them. However, I'm more a fan now of knocking them down and terminating them with a tarp, and that way they leave much more intact residues that endure longer. So they function much better as a grown in place mulch. When they're chopped up so finely here, they break down very quickly, and you don't have a much soil coverage for more than a month or so. So yeah, now we roll them. Here's a little example of a human scale technique some of the crew developed. So yeah, this is cutting edge new technology that yeah, might leave you a little itchy. So we've actually moved away from it. We use more a T-post now that we stomp in unison. I'll show pictures of that later, but that was a fun little experiment there. But then yeah, once that cover crop is knocked down, literally just get it to lay flat on the ground so that you can pull a tarp over it. Then the tarp, we leave the tarp on for a week or so. That's enough to make sure those plants are dead. Since they're already flowering, they're already toward the end of their life cycle anyway. It doesn't take a lot to terminate them. Then when we pull off those tarps, this is those same peas and oats. That's what it looks like. It's turned to a nice straw mulch that we can just rake into the paths and direct seed those beds. So these, you know, we didn't add any inputs here besides seed. So I think this was turnips and storage radishes. And we just direct seeded those with an earthway seeder. Here they are coming up. No weeds, because there's that layer of compost before the cover crop went in, and then the cover crop comes off. You know, the tarping and all of these things together mean that we just have very low weed pressure. I think we pulled a dozen weeds from this plot the whole summer. And then this is in the early fall as they're ready to harvest. And we actually weighed some of these beds. We got about 500 pounds per 100-foot bed of turnips and radishes. So that was pretty good. And we, you know, there's the only inputs here are human labor and seeds. You know, we didn't fire up a machine. We didn't add fertilizer. So it's just a pretty low tech, low input system that's high yielding. So yeah, jumping on to the rye and clover. This is a great, rye is just great for overwintered cover crop. There's really nothing like it for cold season cover cropping that just builds an amazing amount of soil. It just pumps a lot of biomass into the ground and into the stalks. So yeah, highly recommend it. It has a bad rep in farming often because it's so difficult to terminate, but that's only in my experience if you're trying to terminate it too early. So we let it, same as the peas and oats, we let it start to flower. So here you see it, you know, in full flower. You know, don't wait so long that it has any viable seed in it, but yeah, if you wait till it's stocky, the base of the stalks are starting to dry out and brown. It's actually not that hard to kill. So we'll go through the steps here. This is how we seed it. Just like any other crop, we seed it with an earthway seeder. Again, our human scale here might seem a little strange to larger scale farms, but it enables us to get a really good thick stand. You know, we irrigate it and weed it just like any other crop. And yeah, just a real nice stand. This is in the fall. So then we also have the opportunity to run livestock over it. Again, to add fertility, yeah, initiate those biological cycles of symbiosis that come with plants and animals. And this, yeah, this I call turkey on rye. It's a particularly satisfying combination. And there's lots of clover in there too, which they love. And this is a great way to add fertility in the form of feed. So, you know, we have to buy feed for the turkeys anyway. Well, that feed is becoming the fertility for our, you know, vegetables the following season. And the rye is a great catch crop. It catches all those nutrients and, you know, holds it biologically in the soil. So then this is the following spring. This is toward the end of May. You know, it's a 6-foot stand. And there you can't really see it too well, but they just have a T-post on its side, and we, you know, tie a piece of twine to it and we stomp in unison just to get the rye to knock down. And you know, that blade on the T-post, that edge of the T-post acts as a bit of a crimping blade. So we're getting a little bit of a crimp here too, but to make sure that it stays down and really kills fully, we drag tarps over them for, yeah, about a week to 2 weeks, depending on the weather. We secure it very well because, you know, it's a lot easier to move a few extra concrete blocks than it is to chase a 100-foot sail across the farm on windy days. Also wanted to point out here, just another plug for rye. On the right there, you see the peas and oats that we seeded in the early spring. Those are only like calf high by the time this rye was over 6 feet tall. So that's the difference in, you know, photosynthetic soil building power between an overwintered cover crop like rye and a spring planted cover crop like peas and oats. And that doesn't even account for the fact that, you know, to plant peas and oats in the spring, that soil is probably, you know, not growing anything in the winter. So there's some degradation there as well. So this is the rye again. Yeah, when the tarp comes off, again, it looks like
Uh-oh. We might have lost some internet on his part there. Hey, Nagisa, are you really there? Check one.
Oh,
Uh-oh. Well, ladies and gentlemen.
you guys are killing it on
I am.
the chat.
Okay.
Lots of questions.
Um,
On
I'm back. Sorry, I got cut off.
Woo! We were
All right.
afraid there was a meteor came down and like, I don't even know what happened. All right.
Yeah, I've never gotten that before. Some strange error code. But how long have I been out? Have I been
I think it's
talking
been
to an empty room?
14 years. Yeah, not too long. Well, you're back now.
No, we only lost you for about a minute.
Cool. Sorry about that.
It's all right.
Shall
So
I
you've
jump back in,
got,
or,
yeah, jump back in. Just know that we got loads of questions. We're gonna have to weed through them because
yeah. Hopefully we can take them at the end because I might answer them. I might answer them in the course of things. So
you've already answered some of them. So this is great.
right on. Well, I'll plow ahead so we get. I'll no-till ahead so we get through it.
Yeah. All right.
All right. So let's see, where were we? So here we are with the the rye is tarped. The peas and oats are way behind. And then we pull the tarp off the rye. And that's it. Yeah, it's this beautiful grown in place rye straw mulch that then we can plant right through. You know, we have to use a measuring tape here rather than a marking dibble or a gritter or whatever, because there's so much residue. So it does take a little longer to plant, but it's well worth it, I think, in the end. Sometimes we'll use a broad fork. If the residues are really thick, you know, those rye roots, is all that biomass it's putting into the ground it's great, but it makes for this fibrous root mass that can be a little tricky to transplant through. Sometimes we'll take a broad fork, stick it parallel to the bed and use it as a dibble. So kind of work it into the ground just a little bit, loosen up the soil so you can poke in those transplants. The tines on most broad forks are 4 inches, so you can, you know, use any multiple of 4 inches as your spacing. So that's what it looks like after that. I'd say it takes, you know, close to twice as long to transplant, but then we're done and we have this nice weed-free mulched plot that we pretty much don't do anything to, and we got a real good yield of cabbage. For heavy feeders like cabbage, we will put a little bit of fertilizer in that transplant hole as we transplant, you know, a little bit of organic fertilizer, whether it's you know, fish meal, feather meal, alfalfa meal, what have you. And we'll do that according to a soil test, so we make sure we're not over or under applying that. So yeah, livestock integrate really well with cover crops, like I've said. Just, you know, building that diversity, like in a natural system, you know, no natural ecosystem has plants growing without animals. So yeah, trying to mimic that is kind of helps generate soil health. And again, that includes us. Like, we are part of this soil food web. So get out there, get out in the soil. You know, our children can be great models of how to integrate back into the soil food web here. So here we are. Yeah, just, you know, nine employees on 3 acres. There's a lot of human interaction with the land. Interplanting, I'll go through this real quick, just to give you some examples. Interplanting is all about just experimenting, seeing what works for you with the timing, the spacing, you know, what synergies there are with different crops. I think there's no one size fits all. What works for somebody might not work for somebody else. So it really depends on your system, your soil, your climate, your personality. But here are some examples that we've used that we like. We undersow kale and other brassicas to parsley, because kale is one of the few plant families on this earth that does not form mycorrhizal fungus connections. I won't jump into what mycorrhizal fungus is, but look that up if you don't know. It's amazing stuff. It you know, it forms relationships with 95% of plants on Earth and enables them to just interact with the soil in amazing ways. So those fungal communities can be starved out if we grow just an entire plot of brassicas, because they have no solar lifeline via the plants. So to avoid that, to keep that diversity there underground, we undersow to parsley. Parsley is a nice cheap seed. It's also winter kills in our climate. It's biennial, so it doesn't produce seed that would become a weed problem. So it's a nice undersown cover crop that also you could harvest as a crop if you wanted. Similarly, instead of just planting Brussels sprouts into the rye, this is a grown in place rye here again, we interplant with lettuce heads down the middle. Those lettuce heads have enough time to size up and get harvested before the Brussels sprouts grow out and cover that whole area. In the high tunnels, here's some celery on the shoulders of tomato beds. Here's Hakurei turnips and bok choy on the shoulders of cucumber beds. This is a delicious combination of carrots and ginger in a high tunnel. The ginger comes up quickly. You know, it takes a while to sprout, but once it comes up, it pokes right through the carrot tops. So you have the makings of a great soup right there. Here's some radishes interplanted with onions, and carrots on the shoulders of outdoor tomato beds. spinach on the shoulder of the pea beds. Any bed that has, you know, exposed soil on it or unplanted area, that's an opportunity to increase photosynthesis, increase diversity, and increase revenue. So kind of a triple win. We also like to undersow to sweet alyssum for the beneficial insects. Sweet alyssum attracts parasitic wasps, among other insects, and those, you know, great pest control from that diversity. And then integrating perennial planting too. I think someone's not on mute, and I'm getting some reverb. Anyway, so perennial plantings are a great way to integrate diversity, to keep living roots in the ground year round. They can almost act as like a diversity bank that can then seep out into your soils around them. You know, annuals are pretty hard on the soil because, you know, they die back and then there's sort of a dormant period with no living roots in the ground often. So perennials, yeah, can be those little pockets of underground diversity to pull from. They can act as beneficial insect habitat, help control pests. They can add economic diversity. You know, there's fruit and berries and medicinals and flowers that you can harvest from there. And they're just real darn nice to look at. So it makes the farm a great place to visit and work, and brings customers, you know, adds customer appeal. So these are beneficial beds that we plant between our vegetable plots. And we stick birdhouses in them. We have just, you know, 30 or 40 different species of perennial flowering plants in each bed. And the goal is to have, you know, continuous bloom from early spring right through late fall. So here's one in the spring.
Thank you.
Here's one in the fall. And then there's, you know, the shrubs you can put in there. They don't just have to be herbaceous perennials, but you can have tall shrubs, short shrubs. Speeding through this here, but hopefully you can refer to these slides later. You know, shrubs will often provide just a lot more habitat and flower nectar than herbaceous plants can. Also, a lot of these have, you know, edible fruits, so they can be, you know, economic revenue as well. And then, yeah, all the different herbaceous perennials for the hedgerow. We try to focus on native plants, since those have been here the longest. They know how best to interact with the ecosystem. And again, the goal is to kind of have a continuous bloom period, continuous supply of nectar right through the season, overlapping bloom periods for different species. So from early spring right through late fall. Here's you know, here's a list that's native to the Northeast. I imagine a lot of these would also be native to New Jersey. And then not just flowers, but also habitat for overwintering with, you know, native grasses. And having these beneficial beds between every vegetable plot throughout the farm just makes the farm a really nice place to walk around. And it's also bringing all sorts of diversity into the farm. The birdhouses are sized for bluebirds, and they fill up every spring, and it's just a lovely place to work. You can also, you know, fill every nook and cranny with these native flowering plants, and leave some sections of the farm unmowed, and you'll have all sorts of wildflowers move in, and you know, that's great free diversity rather than keeping it all mowed. So yeah, in wrapping up, I think soil health, you know, there's all of these quantitative measures we have for soil health. You can take a soil test, measure the organic matter, and, you know, biological CO2 tests and all these things. But I think soil health is maybe just as important to measure qualitatively. It can be a feeling you get when you're on the land. It can be how you feel after eating the food from that land. I think we know in our gut what soil health really is. So trust that. And yeah, thank you for listening, and thank you for this wonderful crew. This was our last year's crew of you know, hardworking folks, and had a lot of fun with them and owe them a lot. So yeah, and then lastly, a plug for my book that just came out this fall. You can get it anywhere you buy books, or bookshop.org is a great alternative to Amazon. And yeah, please follow us at Frith Farm, Instagram, Facebook, and there's our website. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Awesome. That's a really great talk. You generated a huge amount of interaction, form of questions and comments. As I was watching along the way, you answered a tremendous amount of those questions yourself. Tony's going to start us off with the first one on the list.
Okay, so from Gina T, are there any other downsides or things to consider by using wood chips as mulch between the crop rows, besides cost? So first, Gina, reach out to every possible tree trimmer friend you have, because they want to get rid of this stuff for free.
They've literally got truckloads that they want to get rid of.
So if you are able to find someone of that sort, see if you can get them to deliver a load to your land or a friend's house.
I chase them down the street with business cards.
So using
Done that too. But you do need to make friends with them so you can be sure they cut down the right stuff.
Give them some eggs or veggies or whatever
Yes.
you got. Keep them coming back. So anyhow, so can you tell us about wood chips? Are there negatives, positives?
Yeah. So wood chips, I think they're a great resource. They do tend to be very carbon rich. So that balance of carbon to nitrogen is high toward the C end. So I wouldn't recommend them on top of the beds, because if they mix in with the soil as you're transplanting or seeding, they can really tie up nitrogen, and you'll see sort of yellowed, stunted crops. But that's on top of the bed. In the pads, since we're a no-till farm, there's really no danger of those getting tilled under and mixed into the soil. So in the pads, they can be a great enduring mulch, and feed all sorts of fungal goodness that can benefit your plants.
Have you, from Logan, have you ever used a cheaper form of organic matter than compost, like leaf mulch, to till into the new plot of land in order to bring fertility, and in order to grow the cover crop?
Sure. Yeah. I've tried a lot of different things. I like just manure is great. Or leaf mold, sort of, partially decomposed leaves. I've used bark mulch. Really any kind of organic matter that's not too heavy toward the carbon, and you wouldn't want to till in wood chips. But anything that's balanced or even a little heavy on the nitrogen side is great to till in that during that first initial forming of the beds. Yeah,
I had heard also, so mindful when it comes to wood chips, nitrogen and wood chips, you gotta be clear. Somebody earlier was talking about pizza boxes, put a pizza box down and put on your wood chips. That might even help prevent a little bit of the nitrogen blocking. How about that?
Again, if it's in the path, I wouldn't worry about it too much. If you're trying to put it on top of the bed, I just wouldn't do that. And keep the wood chips in the pads, I'd say, and use more balanced carbon nitrogen material for the tops of beds.
Lots of interest in how you're acquiring all the material. So are you bringing in feedstocks, making your own compost? Are you bringing in finished compost? How are you managing that?
Yeah, it's a dynamic system of definitely a lot of scrounging. The great thing is, like, this kind of farming really depends on being close to population centers. We're a super small scale intensive farm. You're not going to find this kind of farm out in the middle of nowhere. And wherever people and trees live in proximity, there's constant waste streams of leaves, of wood chips. And then you can tap into other industries in your area too. If there's grain production in your area, you can get straw pretty cheap. Whatever it is. If some people use like peanut hulls. There's coconut husks, rice hulls. Whatever waste, quote unquote waste streams are close to you. See if you can tap into those, because those can be really valuable to this kind of farm.
So we're going to jump around a little bit. So this is an exciting one because we just got a BCS finally. We've been making do with everything we've got, but what are your most used BCS attachments?
I just have two actually. So I have the rotary plow.
The Berta, that's what it's called,
to form beds initially. Yeah, the rotary plow is what I think I showed a picture of it when I'm forming those beds, for primary tillage. And that's great for primary tillage and for then forming the raised beds. And then after that, all we use is a flail mower, just to chop up residues, leave them on the surface. And that's really all I've found I need. One thing I've thought about is a snowblower for the winter.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that's it. I tried a power harrow, but I felt like it was actually too much soil disturbance for my taste. Even though you could set the depth to, it just felt like it was really stirring up that soil structure too much for me.
So folks are asking about the weeds and primarily weeds from your feedstock. So no weeds come from the leaves that you're using. How are you managing that, or is it just
Yeah.
low volume?
Yeah, the leaves are pretty weed free. They fall off trees in the fall. Maybe there's a little bit of weed seed on the ground that gets swept up with them, but not, that's pretty minimal. Those are pretty much weed free. We get much more dog toys than weeds in those. But I think straw can be a challenge, depending on, how that was grown. Straw can also be a challenge with Roundup residue. So you got to watch out for that.
Yeah.
In organic production, you really want organic, certified organic straw. But otherwise, yeah, if we're getting, you can compost on the farm. We do some composting here. And if it heats up well enough, that'll kill off the weed seed. That's probably a good idea if you don't know how much weed seed is in, if you're using hay or straw, you could compost it first and then use the compost as a mulch.
Or follow your example and grow your own straw right there in place. I mean, that's a beautiful system that you've worked in there.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, that's really the long-term goal, is to stop having to bring so much onto the farm and grow it ourselves, harvesting in the sun.
Yeah.
And the joy of rolling, especially.
That's right. You get a little dizzy. That's the problem.
Yeah, well, hey, So,
have you experienced any increase in fungal disease problems, particularly in some of those areas where you're growing the multiple species, where you got the basil that tight underneath all of the tomatoes or the radishes in close to the onion neck, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think you have to be careful. I really like to push the limit of how much we can grow, but not go too overboard, because you can, if you seed too thickly, everything will suffer and yeah, it'll just kind of rot. You'll get no airflow. So, the goal is as much photosynthesis as possible without choking out the crops that are there. So yeah, it's that dialing it in to get that just enough airflow, but to maximize photosynthesis. So.
Sure.
And we do grow, that basil was, resistant to downy mildew and yeah, so that helps. Growing disease-resistant varieties helps.
Yeah, plant selection. Mm-hmm. Jared's asking, with such a complex system and lots of hands and feet in the process, do you have SOPs for the team? Do you use clipboards? Like, how do you manage to get the right people on the right task at the right time?
Totally, yeah. We have a pretty dynamic system of that. I have like an online shared spreadsheet as our ongoing to-do list. And it's dynamic. Anybody can edit it, log on to it, strike through font when we're done. So whenever anyone's done with a task, they just go onto that spreadsheet, see what's next, and go out and do it. There's not like a top-down hierarchy of command that you have to find me each time or something. And then, yeah, it's just a matter of like making sure everyone's trained up on the different ways we do things, which I spend, the first month here is pretty intensive for training the crew.
All right, so we really only have just this one last question. So do you or how often do you test your soils?
Yeah. So we test them every fall. So once a year, just to get that, chemical breakdown of the minerals in the soil. And I use that with a big grain of salt. But it gives a rough benchmark for how much fertilizer, if any, we should be applying. And I think that's really, it comes almost down to ethics of doing that soil test. There's sort of a temptation among farmers to just like, oh, I'll just over apply and it'll be great. But then a lot of that fertility is, washing into local water. So yeah, it enables us to dial in exactly what is needed in the soil and add just that amount. And the plants really benefit.
Nice.
Excellent. Yeah. Can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day to speak with us. It was an amazing presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Oh yeah. So next up, we are going to change gears, bring it a little closer to home. And actually, before we bring it, so we have been doing this little 5-minute practice. Everybody need the 5 minutes to pee? I feel like it's a good pattern to set, whether you pee or just stretch. It's up to you.
Maybe